Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's special webcast from the Conference Board, also in partnership with Americans for the Arts. Today's webcast is called Blank Canvas, Optimistic Future for Business and the Arts, and we'll be talking a little bit about the findings from Americans for the Arts and the Conference Board's latest report, Business Contributions to the Arts 2018 edition, which just came out this morning, so it's hot off the press. So we will be looking at a few things, a few different questions today and issues that we'll be covering from the report. To what extent are companies supporting the arts and why do they do it? What are some examples of engaging arts programs? What types of arts-related volunteering programs do companies support? And is it time to start standardizing social outcomes for the arts sector? So those are a few of the questions that we're going to be covering. I'm joined today by two illustrious guests who I'm going to let introduce themselves in just 1 second. However, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First of all, you can earn continuing education credits with us today. Any of these ones on the slide here are available. Just a couple of requirements there. You need to stay online for the entire webcast. And the credits are available for participation in the live webcast only. So if you're watching this on demand, then I'm afraid you missed your chance. A couple of other things as well for you, for those of you watching. Please feel free to ask questions as they occur to you. The three of us on the panel are going to be having a dialogue today rather than sort of presenting and going back and forth, so we would love to infuse your questions into that dialogue. We'll be asking them of each other as we go along, so please join in. There's a chat pod at the bottom left of your screen. So if you do have questions, feel free to type them in there and we'll field them as we go along. You can download the presentation via the file download pod at the bottom of your screen there if you want to have that with you while we go through it. You can make your screen full screen either on the video or PowerPoint at any time by clicking the 4 arrows at the top right of your screen there. At the end of this webcast, there will be a brief evaluation form. We would love to hear from you and get your thoughts so we can incorporate your feedback into future programs. So please take a minute or so to do that. We'd be most appreciative. Then you can share this program with your colleagues. As I said, it's going to be available on demand within about 48 hours. So if you found it interesting and there are people you think would be interested to watch it, we'll be sending out the link to that. So please feel free to share it with your colleagues as well. At the end, stay tuned for a couple of conference discount offers at the end of the program for the Conference Board Philanthropy Conference at the end of this year. And I already mentioned the CPE credits. So that is everything in terms of housekeeping. I would now like to ask our guests to introduce themselves. I'm joined by Emily Peck, Vice President of Private Sector Initiatives at Americans for the Arts, and Charity Boutet, Head of Multicultural Marketing Strategy at Aetna. Emily, do you want to start by saying hello?
Thanks. I'm happy to be here, Alex, and excited to talk about our latest survey results with all of our guests today. Alex and I have been working on this survey for about the past 8 months, so it's exciting to finally release it out to all of you. As I said, I'm Emily Peck. I'm the Vice President of Private Sector Initiatives at Americans for the Arts. The work that we do at Americans for the Arts is really looking at how the arts are transforming communities and how we support all the different players who helped in that work. So I specifically look at how are we looking at funding and partnerships for the arts from the business and foundation communities. And so this survey is one of the sort of tools that we use in order to make that case. We did this survey, as I said, earlier this year, looking at 132 companies that support the arts to really understand why they support the arts and how they're supporting the arts. We've been doing the survey together for the past 2 surveys, but Americans for the Arts has been conducting research on business support for the arts since 1969. And that first survey was actually the first time that we had partnered with the Conference Board for the initial report. So in addition to this survey, we also have a lot of data and information about how arts and business can work together, messaging for the business community on partnershipmovement.org that really tells the story about how the arts are advancing business goals, and using this data and other case studies and examples that we have to help make the case. And we'll talk about some of these examples throughout the entire survey and webinar. So I'm excited to talk about this and be here with all of you.
Thank you very much, Emily. And Charity, over to
Hi,
you.
I'm Charity Boutet, Head of Multicultural Marketing Strategy at Aetna. Aetna is a Fortune 50 diversified health company with over 50,000 employees. At Aetna, our mission is to build a healthier world, one community at a time. We're a longtime supporter of the arts, in part because we realize that health is more than just physical, it's mind, body, and spirit. And the arts have an impact on the health of individuals and of communities. As a multicultural marketer, our job is to bring insights and to develop programs that help us understand and reach all of our members in language, in culture, and in context. And the arts provide a way to reach the myriad of cultures in the U.S. in culture. I've been at Aetna for about 8 years. I started at the Aetna Foundation and then moved to product strategy, and I've been in multicultural marketing over the last year. Since moving back to New York from Hartford about 2.5 years ago, I've had the opportunity to volunteer with the Arts and Business Council of New York. I started as a volunteer with their DIAL program, Diversity and Arts Leadership, which is an internship program that's been around for 25 years that puts interns into arts nonprofit organizations. And then I became a board member, proud to say, a little over a year ago. And I now serve as the chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Circle for Americans for the Arts.
Thanks a lot, Charity. I hope you'll all agree with two wonderful panelists for us today as well. And I've done myself an injustice because I didn't introduce myself. Alex Parkinson, I think it's popping up as Alexander, but Alex will do just fine. I'm a senior researcher and director of the Society for New Communications Research at the Conference Board, and also a co-author with Emily of the report that we're talking about. With all that aside, let's dive into some of the key findings from the report and discuss the topic at hand. I'm going to shirk my responsibility immediately and go to Emily, because I want to start us off by getting an overview of the past year in terms of federal funding for the arts. It was a somewhat volatile year, up and down. We had successes and fears, and I just thought that we could start with Emily, you giving us an overview of where we stand with federal funding and perhaps where the private sector stands alongside that.
Great. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, so it has been a very interesting couple of years in the federal funding for the arts. As I mentioned, Americans for the Arts is really looking at how to support the arts in communities across the country, and government support for the arts is one of the leading ways that we have done this work since our founding. So we're one of the leading organizations advocating for the National Endowment for the Arts. And right as President Trump was being inaugurated, he had proposed the elimination of the National Endowment for the Arts and the other federal arts agencies in his budget. And that was something that we took immediate action to really make the case for the role the arts play in advancing community goals. And you can see on the image on the screen, this is one of the ads that we placed in publications that we knew that elected officials would be looking at, talking about the role that the arts play in creating jobs and supporting the economy and how it's a large part of the economy. It's not just something nice, but this is an integral part of our work. With the advocacy work we did with thousands of grassroots advocates across the country, we were able to, and a lot of partner organizations, we were able to keep the National Endowment for the Arts funding and also increase it in the 2018 budget by $3 million. And this year's appropriations include a $2 million increase to $155 million, which is still in process. But a lot of the messaging that we see that is really important to the federal officials who are looking at the role of the arts is really the same thing that impacts the business community, because everybody wants healthy, vibrant communities, and the arts play a strong role in that. And so that's a lot of the case making and research that we do as an organization. And so some of the examples that we talk about for the business community and the research is also ones that we've used on our advocacy side to the government side. And so, along with the fact that despite these sort of threats to the National Endowment for the Arts and threats to arts funding, we really ended up in a positive place. And we've also seen in this survey that the arts are in a positive place with how businesses are supporting the arts. So that's just an overview, and it's an interesting context as we look at sort of all these different funding sources, how there's, arts organizations are really trying to make sure that they have diversify who they're partnering with, because there, are risks on all different sides of, the economy going down, or, cuts to federal funding, what that might mean. And so we want to make sure that arts organizations are able to build strong relationships across all different sectors.
Great, thank you very much, Emily, for that. A great segue, as you said. The private sector funding for the arts. The survey shows that it is fairly strong. What we found overall is that there's quite broad engagement from the private sector in arts support, and that companies really showed loyalty to their arts partners. I want to point out before we dive too much into the data that the data does reflect companies that are arts supporters. So it shows quite strong support for the arts in certain areas. Remember that we targeted companies who are arts supporters, and those that answer the specific questions do actually support the arts. So if it skews a little that way, that's why. But it's still really interesting to look at some of this as well. So one of the things that we found is that overall, among all of our respondents, 80% of companies contribute financially to the arts. Alongside that, 43% contribute non-cash or in-kind, but overwhelmingly the financial contributions are the strongest. Only 8% of companies that we surveyed said they do not give to arts at all. So again, fairly broad support and engagement from companies in the arts sector. On top of that, you can see on the right-hand side here, only 7% of companies expect to decrease that amount of funding in 2018. So they're telling us that this is going to at least stay the same, and in a number of circumstances, about a quarter of the time, the funding is going to be increasing as well. So we wanted to know why companies contribute to the arts. And I understand this table is a little bit hard to read at the moment, but we'll point out some of the key figures here, and I wanted to make sure that you had the data available to you to take away from this in the end. Personally, I was quite surprised to see long-term existing relationships with a non-profit organization in the arts as the equal top reason for why companies contribute to the arts, and that's alongside senior level executive interest in the arts. Personally, I think it shows that companies have loyalty to their arts partners. I wanted to check in with Emily, our expert in those corporate partnerships, and ask, is that a fair assessment, and why do you think, if so, that companies hold on to their arts partnerships, or appear to hold on to their arts partnerships more so than other social sectors?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we've seen anecdotally when we talk to arts organizations and businesses. And a lot of times that's because of senior leaders who have become incredibly engaged with the arts organizations they support. They join the board, they see the impact on the community, they see how their employees are engaged. And so all of those are really positive things that can happen when are these long-term relationships that are in the company. The one challenge that we definitely see from that is that if there's a change in leadership at the company, if arts organizations haven't built those relationships throughout the company with different levels of staff, there can be big challenges to keeping this support going. And then also, as businesses are merging, they're changing the location of their headquarters, they're sort of realigning their business units. That can be a challenge as well, because the relationships tend to often be very community focused and to the specific organizations there. And so a lot of the stuff that we'll talk about later about how to make the case for how the arts are benefiting business goals, and it's not just a nice thing to do or something because a senior level executive is passionate about it, but that it also really has an impact on engaging employees or serving other needs that the company might do about how they're marketing their brand, helps to allow these relationships to move past one executive or one location to be more integrated into the company. So we have seen that to be true, but it is leads to some cautionary work that we sort of help advise arts organizations and businesses to think about.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Emily. Charity, I want to ask you, or point something out here with Aetna's industry. Non-financial services seem more attuned to the business reasons for supporting the arts than others. If you look at that line, I think it's 4 down. The reason is support strategic business goals. We see non-financial services companies at 52% compared to 41% of manufacturers and 31% of financial services companies. What would you say is Aetna's main reason for supporting the arts, and sort of why do non-financial services companies seem to be a little more attuned to those business goals?
That's a really good question. I think one thing that we don't see on here is health and well-being, right? Which is very important to Aetna. Since 2006, we've contributed nearly $8 million to arts organizations, and that $8 million went to over 500 nonprofit arts organizations, which I think speaks to our 50,000 employees across the country and their interests, both for our employees and for our members, and just the difference that these arts organizations are making in the local community. And then just continuing with the importance of the arts to our employees, we were among the first to do a workplace giving campaign in 1995, and we were awarded part of the $100,000 club by the Greater Hartford Arts Council, and that was for employees who had raised in excess of $100,000 for arts organizations. That was in 1995, and since then our employees have given over $1 million themselves to arts. And so I think that's just an important point to note of just the importance of arts organizations in the local communities for our employees. In addition to the impact on health and wellness, we know that on average, communities that have arts organizations are healthier and more vibrant. So definitely would add that to the list.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, so long-term relationships with arts partners are one reason for companies supporting them quite broadly. I think also, we're seeing the growth of the U.S. economy generally. Companies responded to us when we asked why they were looking to either sustain or increase their giving budgets to arts next year. It's mostly because of growing philanthropy budgets overall. So there's definitely a tie in there that as the economy is buoyant, then companies are starting to increase the amount that they give to philanthropy, and arts is definitely a beneficiary of that. I think we've also seen an increased recognition of the importance of creativity in the workplace, particularly by employees, but employers are noting it as well. And there's some additional research from Americans for the Arts that looks into that too. But Emily, am I missing anything in terms of why we're seeing this broad engagement from the private sector in the arts?
Yeah, so just move to a slide that really talks some about the effect the art support has on company objectives that addresses some of the questions that you were just talking about. The economy is definitely one of the ones that we've long seen tracking with art support as the economy grows, as it's currently doing, art support is increasing and philanthropy budgets are increasing. And so that's really positive. And so a lot of, the case making that we make is, when, budgets might be decreased, how can you talk about the role that the arts have in impacting other business goals or other areas that, art businesses are looking at? And so it doesn't become something that is easily cut off, but is really integral to what the business is doing. Creativity is one of the ones that you mentioned as being important, and that's continues to be really something that the arts are uniquely leveraged to do, and to make that connection to companies about, the role of the arts, and arts engagement for their employees and for creativity and problem solving. So that's on this chart, the third reason why companies talk about why they support the arts. And as you mentioned, we also have some other data that helps to make this case. Last week, we released another research project that we've done for 2 years now, which is called Americans Speak Out About the Arts, and it's a public opinion poll of over 3,000 Americans. And we asked some questions that align nicely with the data that we're talking about here. One of the ones that I'm going to go to is this one, which talks about the impact of creativity on your job and on success. And so this was a question that we only asked of people who are currently employed. And from that, we saw that more than half of employed adults believe their jobs require them to be creative, and 60% believe this creativity will lead to success. And that, is a great sort of data to make the case that, creativity in your job is something that employees think is incredibly valuable, their bosses think is valuable, companies see as valuable. And so how can we make the case of the role the arts can play in building that creativity in the workforce is the examples that we try and put out there a lot. And then if you go back to the...
Emily, I love that because, we were just talking about non-financial services companies and why, asking the question, why is giving less? And part of it may be because the business case is less well known, right? So this information that you're providing is is really valuable. And I think there's an opportunity for Americans for the Arts to help with that business case.
That's great. Yeah, no, thank you for that. The other reason that we see here is, the top reasons that businesses support the arts is the impact it has on the quality of life and in the community. And that, as we go forward 2 slides, is another data point from our public opinion poll that we have that talks about how, all these different arts organizations enhance communities. And going back to the earlier point about the long-term support for the arts, this is something that we've seen is that you can really see the impact on your community, and that makes a difference for when you're recruiting employees and you're keeping employees there and they're thinking about sort of where their kids are going to go to school, where they want to live, and having a vibrant arts community is important. And so when we asked about the importance of the arts on community, we saw that 90% of Americans agreed the arts are important to quality of life, and 86% agreed that arts institutions are important to local business and the economy. So this is just some additional data points that really help us make the case for the value of the arts to community and creativity.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Emily and Charity. I just want to take a second to remind everyone that if they have any questions, they should feel free to type those into that chat pod at the bottom left of the corner there, and we can field them as we go along. In the meantime, we established that 80% of companies provide a financial contribution to the arts. I want to dive into those financials just a little bit here because there's some fairly large discrepancies, and some of them fall to the non-financial services companies there, and I think Charity just made a good point about making the business case a little more strongly. First of all, the average dollar value of contributions to the arts, you see at the bottom of the slide, is $1.6 million. And that includes cash and in-kind contributions. We also have the benefit of looking at a matched set of data from the couple of years that we've been doing the report. It's only 20 companies, admittedly, but it still shows an interesting move from the previous report of an average of $2.3 million among those companies to this year's report, which is 2 years later in the data, of 3.6 million. So it's a significant jump of about 1.3 million in itself from the last time we looked to those companies that we've tracked across both surveys. But for me, the really interesting thing here is the size of the manufacturing sector's dollar contributions. And I know this graph is somewhat misleading because the factory there makes it look like it's lower. But in fact, manufacturers averaged about $4.6 million in their dollar value of contributions versus $2.2 million for financial services and only about $565,000 for non-financial services. Some of that could be some of the outliers that we have in the responses. We are talking about means here, so the outliers could influence that. We heard certainly from Charity before that Aetna's contribution is far above that. But what I posit here is that manufacturing companies are perhaps seeing the benefits of arts to creativity and innovation more so than their financial services or non-financial services counterparts. And I say that because when we look at another question as well, we see that 55% of manufacturers were actually more likely than other sectors to believe that supporting the arts can stimulate creative thinking and problem solving. And so there's about a 15% difference between the two there. So I think that perhaps manufacturers are starting to clue into the importance of arts to creativity and innovation. Emily, do I have that right?
Yeah,
what do you
think?
I
think that manufacturing companies have, are strong supporters of the arts, and we have examples of some companies who have been longtime supporters of the arts, and really see the value to their company and to their sort of creation of products. One of the examples that we really use a lot because it's such a great example is Kohler Company, which is a manufacturing company. Many of you might know them for sort of plumbing and toilets and sort of all bathroom fixtures and all of those pieces. And they have an amazing artist in residence program at their factories in Wisconsin. And what they do for that is that they, bring in artists to work in the factories, artists who, might not have access to the kilns that you'd have in a factory floor or, other equipment like that. And they're working alongside the employees who are working on the factory floor, and they're learning from each other. The employees are helping the artists think about new ways of addressing some issues they might be having with their artistic processes. But then the artists are also, using the tools that the Kohler employees are, thinking about every day in different ways, and sort of giving them different ideas for product design, things that have led to new ideas and new innovations. And so we've seen a lot of different examples like that from manufacturing companies. I think there's also the connection manufacturing companies have to their communities, as a very place-based type of business. And so, there's a lot of great examples like that. And then, financial services being the sort of secondary one from the survey, I think is also something that we've long seen. The work that we do at Americans for the Arts was started by David Rockefeller, who founded Chase Bank. And, he and a lot of other financial services companies in 1967 were thinking about, how they can be giving back to their community. And so they, long led and created that tradition at companies of supporting the arts. And so, those two industries, are ones that we have seen a lot of great examples with over time. So yeah, I think those are, there's a lot of different examples we can give manufacturing companies, but I think that, they do see the value towards creativity.
And so, Charity, not to put you on the spot, but you mentioned perhaps that the business case hasn't been as well articulated as it could be for non-financial services companies.
Not
is that
as well articulated, but maybe not as well known? Yeah.
Okay. So what do we need to make better?
Oh, I think the examples like what Emily just shared from the manufacturing industry, if we have those examples from the many industries that would make up that non-financial services category, I think that would go a long way as well. And we talked about creativity. I mean, there's also diversity and inclusion and the power of the arts there. Aetna recently sponsored a series of roundtables, arts and business roundtables, on how you can leverage the arts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we've had some great conversations coming out of that about how the arts can help to diversify the pipeline and can also play a part in integrating into our strategy to achieve our business goals. So I think adding to the story could also help.
Yeah, that's very cool. We'd love to hear more
about that.
And
we're always collecting stories of these amazing arts and business partnerships, and sharing them on our Partnership Movement website, trying to get them out in different ways. We last week had our annual gala that we do honoring 10 businesses for their partnerships with the arts, and we get nominations from around the country. And look at all different size businesses, all different industries. That's actually how we first got to know Aetna, was when they were nominated for this award. And that's a way that we really want to showcase how different companies and different industries that might not be the traditional ones you think about, how they're partnering with the arts to advance business goals. And we use those stories as case studies throughout the year, and really try and tell those stories in new ways to different audiences in the business community. So, like Charity said, because they're not always that well known, but when people start to see them and understand them, then they can think about how to integrate them into their business practices.
Yeah, it's a great repository of information you guys have got there.
And just like another example, I think is just to kind of expand our consciousness around what can that in-kind giving be, that even that's not financial. There's an organization called 224 in Hartford, which is an eco space. It has everything from dance to workspaces to sound healing. And our space planners at Aetna volunteered there and helped to design the space. And you think about what that does to both inspire our space planners and to spark their creativity, but then also allows them to give back their skill set to arts organizations in Hartford.
Yeah, you're playing a great role here as my segue person, Charity. Because that's great. It's wonderful. Because we have seen here in the data that non-financial services companies are more inclined to contribute non-cash or in-kind contributions than others. It's a fairly large jump there. 47% of non-financial services companies versus 36% of financial services, or 31% of manufacturing companies as well. So, I mean, you gave a great example then. Is there anything inherent in the non-financial services business that makes them more inclined to be non-cash supporters, or anything else you wanted to point out as to why non-financial services might be a bit more non-cash friendly than others?
Yeah, I think, Charity's example of how employees are giving, pro bono in-kind support is really something to think about. Because we hear, that's an amazing example that Charity provided, and we hear lots of those different types of stories of how employees can be using their skills that they, have and bringing them to arts organizations. We partnered on an event with Booz Allen Hamilton last week, and that's one of the ways, they're a people-powered business, and that's one of the things that they talk about is how do their employees use the skills that they have to serve their communities in new ways. And much like the Kohler example, that has led to new ways to pitch their business, new ideas about how they can do their work. And so a lot of it, I think there's a lot of different ways that people are giving. It might be space and it might be products, but I think a lot of times it's also their people who are giving back and providing great levels of support that are also benefiting the employees and their companies.
And you think that volunteer hour is worth a lot, right? If you think about it, even just in terms of salary or, the hourly wage that an employee might get. At Aetna, volunteering is just part of our culture. This year, we actually have an initiative to double the number of volunteer hours that our employees have logged. We're aiming at 1 million volunteer hours this year. We're excited about that. And a lot of that will go to arts organizations.
Great. And serving in the segue role again, we one of the things that we saw in the non-cash area was that the most common art supporting activity was to promote board service at arts organizations. Obviously, a very high level of volunteering there. It's particularly true at companies with large revenue. 75% of companies with revenue of $25 billion or more, which is Aetna's bracket as well, promote board service. And that's a lot higher than just sort of the regular volunteering activities that we saw. Again, I think this is a reflection of the long-standing partnerships that companies have with arts organizations and the loyalty that they typically show. These board service positions are important to companies because it's part of a leadership development framework as well, that they send employees to nonprofit partners to help expose them to new experiences and diverse points of view. And the fact that companies are willing to promote these with their arts partners, I think really just shows a lot of trust in those partnerships. So do you agree, Charity? Does Aetna promote board service at arts organizations?
Absolutely. I've been at Aetna for 8 years, and this is the second board that I've served on. When I moved from Hartford to back to New York, I said, I am a visual artist. I have this other part of me that I haven't been able to express, and when, what better place in New York to get involved in the arts? So I actually reached out to Miguel Centeno, our community marketing head for the East, and said, what are the arts organizations that we work with? And that's when I got introduced to Americans for the Arts and the Arts and Business Council of New York. My company's been completely supportive of me serving in the board member capacity. It's been wonderful for my personal development, just things like this with public speaking, but also being able to make a business case to my colleagues and to get them involved and their creative juices flowing. And so I would say absolutely it has to do with the long-term relationships. It has to do with professional development for our employees, and then also just a real desire by employees to give back, and they have that skill set that they may have developed on the job that they can then give back in a board member capacity.
Yeah, great. And is there anything that the company actually does itself to try to bring more people in? Mm-hmm. Your personal example there was you being quite proactive, but does the company reach out and try to instigate these positions too?
That's an interesting question. I've been part of one meeting that was about board service, but what we do that maybe is not as direct for board service, but is in support of volunteering, is for every 20 hours that an employee logs, we give a check to the nonprofit of $350. So there is that incentive to not just give your money, right? I mean, and we will match your monetary donation as well up to a certain amount, but also to give that service. And so the way that I became a board member, both for the Arts and Business Council of New York, and then I was a board member for the YWCA of Greater Hartford, was first through volunteering. And I think there's a natural transition, as you serve those hours, as you get to know the organization that you want to serve in a leadership capacity.
Great. Okay, still on this table, down the bottom there where I've circled in red, one of the things that I wanted to point out is that what we don't see is a lot of effort to encourage employees' own artistic pursuits, and we touched on this ever so slightly in the beginning, but at the highest level, that 25% of companies with large revenue is the highest percentage of companies that actually encourage the events for their employees to showcase their artistic talent. I'm a little bit surprised about that. Emily, if companies are trying to encourage employees to be more creative, as we have discussed, why aren't they doing more to nurture creative activity or creative endeavors?
I think it goes back to a point that Charity was making earlier about really getting out there and making that case and companies understanding these opportunities. For these different types of programs to be successful, you both need internal champions at the company who are really helping to organize and think about how to create these programs. But then you also need arts partners, arts organizations who are helping to make that case, who are providing the support in order to do this work. It's something we've been looking at a lot at American City Arts as we've been thinking about employee engagement, a really broad spectrum from volunteer opportunities we talked about to board service, to then how do we get employees engaged in these types of activities that we see success from. We see from Battle of Bands competitions, the companies that have participated in them talk so much about how it led to different teamwork and opportunities for people to engage across different departments and different sectors of the company that maybe they didn't have a reason to engage before but now do. We've seen stories of companies that learn about the creativity of their employees when they do arts exhibitions or different types of performances. That really brings about new sides of employees that maybe you hadn't seen that skill before, but it provides an opportunity to really understand what your employee can bring to the job and what they're doing outside of the job that adds a different element to them. And it's not we're not just the people who are sitting at our desks, but we all have outside artistic pursuits or hobbies or other things that we're doing that really could help influence us at work and help us feel more connected. Charity and I were talking earlier about she mentioned that she's an artist, and how does that impact her at work, and how do you bring sort of that self to the workplace that might have felt like two separate things. And so I think a lot of it is really about case making and helping people understand the value of doing this work. And it's not just a fun thing to do, but it does have an impact on how your company, how your employees are perceiving your company and what they're bringing to the workplace. And I think one of the things that we think about, and we're going to talk a little bit about the measuring and the outcomes of this, is as companies continue to be more data driven, is how do we create the metrics and the research that shows the value of these types of programs, so businesses can see it from the stories that we tell, but also from the research. And so that's something that we're always looking at. And if people out there have great data and stories on that, we'd love to hear them, because we know from the individual anecdotes that we're seeing in the testimonials the power of these types of programs. And Aetna is one of the ones that has so many different examples of bands and choruses and arts performances,
shows, art galleries, and absolutely.
And so we share those stories a lot, but I'm sure Charity can tell you about seeing some of the other sides of her coworkers through these types of programs.
Oh yeah, I love that you mentioned that. It took a while for me to be able to call myself a visual artist, even though I had done art, K through 12, and but I wasn't practicing it regularly, and I wasn't compensated for it. I recently sold my first art painting. Yes, thank you.
That's great.
Which was great. So now I need to learn more about how you price art and that sort of thing as an independent artist. But I just came back from FAMU's homecoming, where I went to undergrad, and we have the Marching 100, which is the best marching band in the country. And I was talking to another alum who used to play the trumpet in the Marching 100. And I said, oh, you're a musician. And she said, no, I'm not. And I said, but you've been trained on the trumpet. You were part of the Marching 100. You're a musician. She said, well, maybe. But, I wonder why we're reluctant to embrace that part of ourselves that even maybe it was developed when we were younger, in grade school, maybe it was developed in college. But I wonder how we would increase the support for the arts if we were able to uncover those hidden musicians and hidden artists and help everyone to kind of embrace that artist within.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were discussing before the program with our producer in the tech booth there, who threatened if I was cut out of this webcast to do his one-man show for everyone. So I'm just saying, if anyone from the conference board is listening, we have a great vehicle here to give Luke his chance to shine.
But Aetna example. So at Aetna we have an art gallery, right? That. Did we want more examples?
Yes, no, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, great.
I think he probably wants to be saved from it.
At Aetna. So we have an art gallery that actually shows art from local artists, which is fantastic. Still, while Aetna is a very diverse company, there may be some meetings where I'm the only woman or the only Black woman in a meeting. And it is so powerful to be able to walk past that art gallery and see art that is sharing the lived experiences of people of color. It's just and particularly people who may not have been in that last meeting. For me personally, it makes a difference. It creates a sense of connection and purpose, and has played a role in my happiness and satisfaction in the workplace as a woman of color. We have a jazz band, and it's just great to walk past that common area and to be able to hear jazz, after a long day, to have that moment of mindfulness and renewal that makes such a difference. As I think of other examples, and I've shared this one with Emily before, our chief marketing officer recently put out a blog post about how we all need to get jazzier. He plays the jazz saxophone, has recently begun taking lessons again, and he uses jazz as a analogy for how we need to master our craft and also be able to collaborate and be spontaneous and innovate. And that blog post spoke to me so much as an artist. And when you think about training and how we all learn in different ways and communication and the arts can provide a channel to connect with people that is different than you might traditionally find.
Yeah, those are great examples. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Charity. We've had a question come in, and so this is a really interesting one. We've been talking about some of the engagement and enjoyment, I guess, of the arts as well, but they also play a really important societal role, I think, too. So the comment is, please share thoughts of the intersection of the arts as an obstruction to violence, including basis for funders in the private sector. If it's not something that we can tackle immediately, we will certainly follow up via email with the question. But did either of you have any thoughts on that, on the role of arts to obstruct violence? Yeah. It's actually, please, Emily,
I think the first thing that immediately came to mind is not on the obstruction side, is really more as the response to violence. As I mentioned last week, we had our gala where we honor businesses for their art support, and one of the companies that we honored as Fifth Third Bank, based in Cincinnati. And about 2 weeks or so before the event, they were one of the latest victims of a mass shooting at their company. And when they were accepting the award, they talked about the role of the arts and how they addressed coming back into the lobby of their building where this had taken place, and how to sort of address their employees, and created sort of a communal art project where they all were dipping their hands in paint and painting, adding that to sort of a collage that they created together. And we see different examples like that are really about how to respond to violence. I think there are other ways and data points that I don't have at the top of my head right now, but I can send you to actually another new resource that we just created called our Social Impact Explorer, which is something
it's great. I was just looking at it yesterday. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad this gives an opportunity, because I think there's some great data points in there. It looks at the role the arts play in addressing a lot of different community issues. I think about 30 of them. And some of it is about community safety. And as you look at the Social Impact Explorer, you can see examples of how the arts have helped address these different issues, research that's available, other readings and things like that. And so there's some good, and also funders who are invested in that work. And so I think there's some good data points in there that we can point you to. And if you go to the American Sphere Arts website, you can see it on there about the Social Impact Explorer. It's on the homepage. It looks like a big pinwheel of lots of bright colors that spins around. And I think it's just artsusa.org/social impact, but I will have to send you the exact one because I don't have it memorized.
Also find it on your Twitter.
Yes, also on Twitter at Americans for Arts. There's also another place that you can find that, and we'll make sure to send it out. Oh, and one of my colleagues jumped in with the link, so thanks, Patricia.
Thank you very much. Okay, time is ticking by, so I hope that answered the question about the violence issue. Let us know if you want to follow up on anything about that. I want to keep moving because we promised to talk a little bit about social impact measurement and social outcomes. In the survey, we still find that we're not seeing a whole lot of companies measuring social impact when it comes to the arts. Now, one of the things that we did this year was to try to look at companies who measure standardized outcomes of the arts. So we included some of these standardized outcomes from the Impact Genome Project, which has an arts genome. Mission Measurement is the organization that manages the Impact Genome Project. They have scoured through tens of thousands of reports and various types of literature to come up with common social outcomes across a range of social areas. So this is their arts genome, and these are the standardized arts outcomes that they've come up with. They are to provide cultural enrichment, to reach diverse audiences, to strengthen the creative community, to enhance arts appreciation, to expose new artistic talent, and to develop individual creativity skills. So when they look at the literature out there, this is what they see as the common outcomes that organizations are trying to measure. You can see a reasonable percentage of companies are starting to measure these standardized outcomes, about a quarter at some of the highest levels, a little bit higher as you break it down by revenue. But the majority do not. 55% overall there do not measure any of these standard outcomes. Until now, I think the economic impact of the arts has always been a really strong case for the social impact that the arts can have. Charity, what type of things do you measure at Aetna? Does it reflect some of these standardized outcomes?
We measure employee engagement, things like ability to be yourself at work. We have a survey that goes out every year, but not these specific outcomes.
Yep, interesting. Yeah, I think there's often a desire to tie it back to the business outcomes as well, whereas these look specifically at the social impact. But I would like to point out a couple of things among these that could help to tie the social impact back to the business value, because we saw in a previous slide that companies believe that the arts can help to improve the quality of life in the community. Well, if you look here, you could sort of start to measure the cultural enrichment impact of the arts and tie that back to that business objective that you're trying to achieve. Companies are also stimulating, or they believe that the arts stimulate creativity and problem solving. Here we see social outcomes like strengthening the creative community or developing individual creativity skills. So these are social outcomes that could be tied back to some of those business objectives. And one more example, companies believe the arts can reach underserved communities. Here we see reaching diverse audiences as a standardized outcome, or enhancing arts appreciation. So both of those standardized outcomes, again, could help to achieve that business objective. Emily, what do you make of this? Am I going on a tangent, or would you like to see organizations start to measure social standardized outcomes like this?
Yeah, it's something we've been talking about a lot, because as you mentioned, we've long done an economic impact study of the arts, looking at the impact they have nationally and on local communities, and that data has been incredibly helpful in making the case to government, to business, about the value of the arts to their communities. And so we have begun addressing, how do you measure the social impact of the arts, and how do you help communities make the case? So the Social Impact Explorer that I mentioned is sort of one of the first pieces of that work in order to help make the case of the role the arts play in all of these important social issues that businesses and communities are thinking about. And then we're also looking deeper about how do you begin looking at the role the arts can play in health and wellness, and what does that mean for companies like Aetna, who that's their priority, and how do you be able to measure that impact? Because I think this trend isn't going away. It's something we see in the business community, something we see from foundations, is really wanting to be able to see that return on investment, see how to measure that impact. And so as much as we can help arts organizations think about it, and also help businesses think about what they're looking for and how they're what they really want to measure. And that's something I've definitely seen as well, is that businesses want to measure the impact, but they're still trying to figure out exactly what that means and what they're trying to measure. And sometimes it is a little bit more of counting things versus the impact. And so how can we help both sides make that case stronger? So I think that's something that as much as the work that you're doing to help businesses think about how to standardize these measurements, we're also trying to think of how to help arts organizations and businesses think about that work.
Sounds like a dynamic partnership between our organizations, Emily. Okie doke. We've got about 10 minutes left, so any questions from the audience, please pop them in the chat pod now. I want to turn just quickly to Charity to share another example of some of the work, and I think this one particularly highlights some of the efforts that Aetna is making to target diverse populations with some of their art support.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So the example that I'd like to share is of Burns Elementary School, which is an elementary school right in Aetna's backyard. Aetna is headquartered in Hartford, Connecticut. And Aetna as a company has so many resources, but here was this elementary school right in our backyard who was one of the lowest performing elementary schools in the country. There were, for K through 12, they were reading at about 4% of reading proficiency, whereas the standard in Connecticut, I think, was 26%. So what we did is we adopted the school, and employees from all different parts of Aetna volunteered at the school in many different ways. One of those ways was through a partnership with United Way, where we had reading buddies, and 40 employees became reading buddies. And one part of that program was then creating these literacy kits that were informed by art. So when there was a group within Aetna who only had an hour to volunteer, but they wanted to do something, we had them create these literacy kits where they read the book that that would be read to the child, and maybe it was about a bunny, and then they create a little bunny puppet, or maybe it was about a snake. Maybe they create a snake out of popsicle sticks. But they engaged in an art project to help that book have more of an impact with the students. And so then when that literacy kit goes to the reading buddy, the employee reads to the student, uses those art accompaniments for the reading, and then engages with the student in an art project as well, where they can make their own puppet or make their own popsicle snake. And that's just one of the examples of ways that our employees have interacted with the school. But I think it's really powerful because it both shows a long-term commitment to the school. It is bringing arts and into reading and into education in a really unique way. But then it has fantastic outcomes. So the students are now, testing off the charts, and that their reading proficiency is at a much higher level than where it started. And in part, thanks to that program, as well as others, we also brought mindfulness. When you think of another type of art, we brought mindfulness to the school. We have a mindfulness expert who meets with the students and meets with the teachers. So, when it's 2 o'clock and everybody's kind of tired at the end of the day, the students are able to think about mindfulness, and the teacher can engage in the same way. So just another example of what we've done with Burns Elementary School, which is now doing fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great example. Really impressive stuff from Aetna. Thank you for sharing all of that today, Charity. I'm going to start to wind down a little bit, but as I do that, I want to point towards the future a little bit. The title of the webcast, and this is something for both of you on the panel. The title of the webcast suggests that there's an optimistic future for business contributions to the arts. What do you both think about that? Is that true? Is that what we're seeing? Emily, I'll start with you.
I think that's absolutely what we're seeing. I think that from both this research and then just from the conversations that I've had when I'm at business conferences or talking to different businesses that are supporting the arts, they're really thinking about their art support in really, innovative ways. From companies who are coming to me and asking, my focus is on equity, or my focus is on health and wellness, or, we're really thinking about, how to make a community that's safe for our employees. How do we keep our art support in there, and how do we make this case strong? And so I think that, people are really looking at the arts as a powerful tool to the work that they're doing at their companies. It's great to see the research from the survey to say that there is this increase. I think there's always more work that we could be doing to help arts organizations be able to make the strong case and businesses understand that value. Conversations like this are a great way to do it. But, I'm hearing such amazing work going on around the country that it's great to be able to see the data pointing to that and, feel this optimism.
Charity,
what do you think? Do you think we've got a good future ahead of us?
Absolutely.
On a good foundation?
As an employee, healthcare is local, and we give to arts nationally. I think of organizations like Theater Forward, which is doing amazing work supporting regional theaters in 19 cities across the country. We're a huge supporter of Theater Forward. Or even just locally here in New York, we'll be at the Studio Museum in Harlem's gala just next week, which is a museum that's dedicated to art of artists of African ancestry here in New York. And when I think about healthcare needing to go both local and national, there's just so much opportunity because the arts are ingrained in those local communities. They matter to our employees, they matter to the communities where we work, where we live, where we play, and where our members are. And so I only see that the support from our employees and the volunteerism increasing.
Yep, wonderful. Well, thank you both very much. I'm going to wind us up here, although I see someone typing. Perhaps I'll speak slowly in case something comes in. The slide that you see at the moment for the audience is a discount code for the Corporate Philanthropy Conference run by the Conference Board in December. Emily and I will be presenting at one of the working sessions just prior to that. So if you're interested to join that, please take down that code to get a discount there. And then we have some additional resources that are related to business contributions to the arts, of course, giving in numbers. I'm still talking about the 2017 edition, but the 2018 edition is right around the corner, and I mean within the next few weeks. So keep an eye out for the new giving in numbers, which is published by CECP in association with the Conference Board, and that will give you a really great overview of corporate philanthropy more generally, whereas where we dive into the arts here in this report. We also have a piece called The Future of Disaster Philanthropy, which looks at the need for disaster preparation, more so than a couple of the other periods in the disaster philanthropy life cycle, if you will. A couple of webcasts on demand, one coming up in November with some friends at Team for Tech, Innovative Solutions for Values-Based Talent Development. That really goes into some of the pro bono work more generally, not just for arts organizations, but some of the pro bono volunteer activities that are taking place with a number of companies. Okay, with that in mind, those typing warnings didn't come to any questions, so I will finish this off. And once again, thank you very much to Charity Boutet at Aetna for joining us, and to Emily Peck at Americans for the Arts for joining us. I thought it was a great conversation, and I hope everyone did as well. The webcast, as I said earlier, will be available on demand within the next 48 hours, so please feel free to share it. Otherwise, thank you all out there for joining us as well. This has been a Conference Board special webcast, and we hope to see you again in another one soon.